Should the Warriors trade for Jimmy Butler? Let's get into it. So according to Sam Amick, the Warriors are reportedly interested in Jimmy Butler, and he says they probably already made calls to the Heat. I'm not gonna lie, Jimmy Butler is an interesting name, and I say Jimmy Butler is interesting for a few simple reasons. 1, he's a 6'7" wing. 2, he's a two-way player. 3, he's a legit second option. 4, he's a playoff riser. And 5, he's a playmaker. He checks a lot of boxes that the Warriors could desperately use. All-star two-way wings are hard to come by. Now, obviously there's a lot of downside with a trade like this. Number 1, he's 35 years old, and he's injury prone. Earlier in his career, Jimmy Butler was known for being an Iron Man, but that was in his early to mid-20s. Now at 35 years old, you'd be lucky to get a 70-game season out of him. Although a core of Steph, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond is formidable, you can't deny the fact that they're old as hell. I think it comes down to what the trade looks like. Obviously, if you're the Heat, you're going to demand Kuminga. You're also almost certainly going to have to throw in Wiggins to make the contracts work. And let's be real, the Warriors got to throw in some first. I know a lot of you Warriors fans are like, whoa, Kuminga and first? No way. Jimmy Butler's a guy, bro. Like, let's not act like Jimmy Butler's not a guy. Like, he's a playoff riser. He's an all-NBA caliber player in the playoffs. Even at his age, he's still a really good player. So if you think the Heat are going to give up Jimmy Butler without demanding Kuminga and at least one first-round pick, but it's just not happening, bro. Regardless of his age, you're not getting back a talent of that caliber without giving up something of value. Yes, Jimmy Butler is 35 years old, but he has at least 2 seasons of elite play in him, and that by itself is worth something. Depending on how far back Steph can push his prime, the Warriors operate on a 2 to 3 year window. Maybe 4. Jimmy Butler fits that timeline. Now, for the sake of this video, let's just assume the trade is Kuminga, Wiggins, GP2, and Kevon Looney, along with, let's call it, draft compensation for Jimmy Butler and Josh Richardson. So after this hypothetical trade, there's 2 possible depth charts they can roll with. Let's go over both of them. This first one is a bigger lineup. You got Steph at point, you got D'Anthony Melton at the 2, Jimmy Butler at the 3, Draymond Green at the 4, and TJD at the 5. The second unit is Pods, Buddy Hield, Moody, Slow-Mo, and Quentin Post. Now, a few takeaways with this depth chart. Number 1, the spacing is super clunky. You got a Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, TJD frontcourt, bro. That's just not good enough from a spacing standpoint. Jimmy Butler, although shot a good percentage from 3 last season, he rarely takes them. Ironically, the same story with Draymond Green. They both shot over 40% from 3 last season. But as you can see from the attempts, they're not really threats from out there. TJD's not shooting anything outside of 3 feet. So between your starting small forward, power forward, and center, they're probably getting less than a combined 5 threes a game. That's just not modern basketball. But the problem is, this is the only lineup that gives them enough size to compete. The Draymond TJD frontcourt is stout defensively. And then you throw in Jimmy Butler, who's also a good defender. You also got a really good on-ball defender in D'Anthony Melton. You got Draymond Roman playing free safety. You got TJD as your rim protector. And then you got Jimmy Butler in the passing lanes. I definitely see the vision defensively. But offensively, I just can't get past that spacing. Maybe if this was the late 90s, they can get away with it. But in the modern NBA, in 2024, it's just not good enough. All right, now let's discuss the second possible starting 5. You got Steph Curry at the 1, D'Anthony Melton at the 2, Moses Moody at the 3, Jimmy Butler at the 4, and Draymond Green at the 5. Now, the reasoning behind his lineup is that you're getting more space on the court. Obviously, Steph's the best shooter in NBA history, but then you flank him with D'Anthony Melton and Moses Moody. 2 solid shooters. You push Jimmy Butler up to the 4 and Draymond up to the 5, and all of a sudden their limited shooting isn't as bad. Jimmy Butler is more than capable of playing power forward. He's played a lot of power forward for the Heat the past 2 or 3 seasons. He has enough size and toughness to do it, especially in the modern game where power forwards are downsizing more and more. In today's league, most power forwards are basically big small forwards. So in this scenario, you're surrounding Steph, Draymond, and Jimmy Butler, your big 3, with 2 3-and-D shooters. I'm confident if you give Moody a bigger and more consistent role, he can find his rhythm from 3. And D'Anthony Melton's a 37-ish% three-point shooter. Now, like the other starting 5, this one comes with downsides as well. Obviously, the Warriors are playing small ball. Draymond Green's your full-time starting center, and Jimmy Butler's your full-time power forward. Let's just touch on a few more positives before I go to the negatives. Number 1, this is an extremely smart, high IQ team. You got Draymond at center and Jimmy Butler at power forward. That's a lot of defensive IQ. And then you got D'Anthony Melton and Moses Moody, 2 long-arm defenders that can wreak a lot of havoc in the passing lanes. Although technically a small ball unit, Steph is surrounded by a lot of length. D'Anthony Melton, 6'8" wingspan. Moses Moody, 7'1" wingspan. Jimmy Butler, I believe, has a 6'11" wingspan. Draymond Green, 7'1" wingspan. So they would definitely be a feisty defensive group that's going to make a lot of plays in the passing lanes. But they just don't have enough size. Even though Jimmy Butler's a solid competitor on the boards, I just can't get behind a Draymond Green, Jimmy Butler frontcourt. They're both 6'6", 6'7". They're both 35 years old. They're both pretty injury prone. That's just not a formula for getting through a regular season healthy. At this stage in their career, they need to be doing less physically, not more. If you run with that starting 5, by the end of the season, they're going to get worn down. At least the idea of Kuminga is that he's only 21 years old. He should be able to handle the workload and the physical toll that comes with playing power forward. With Jimmy Butler, yeah, he could physically handle it and he can compete, but is he going to be in one piece by the end of the season? I think that's playing with fire. If the Warriors were to make this trade to form a Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green big 3, they would need to make a second smaller trade for a center. The idolized version of Quentin Post is theoretically everything they would need. He's a 7-footer. He's a stretch 5. He's projected to be a shot blocker and rebounder. I mean, that's everything the Warriors would need out of that position. But the problem is, he's a sick-around rookie, and none of that's guaranteed to come to fruition. Yes, the Warriors hit the lottery with TJD last season, but banking on repeating that success with Quinton Post in year one, that's extremely risky. One thing I will say, at least in this trade iteration, they get to keep Pods and Moody, so they do still have some young talent sprinkled across the roster. It's just that front court rotation, man. If Quinton Post ain't ready, you're basically banking on TJD to play at least 25 to 30 minutes a game. And although I think TJD is worthy of being a 25-minute per game player, that comes with the caveat that he's playing next to a power forward that can shoot. I like the Draymond TJD pairing defensively, but offensively it's a lot to overcome. If you make this trade, and Kuminga in year 4 goes on to take a leap and turns into a star, you better hope Jimmy Butler comes through and y'all win a championship. If not, this trade quickly turns into a disaster scenario that will haunt the Warriors for a long time. There's a max player in there somewhere, and I feel like this is the year where he puts it all together. Now, if it comes down to it, if you ask me, would I make this trade? I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of torn. On one end, yes, Jimmy Butler is 35 years old, but he still has at least 2 more elite years in him. And if you're going off of Steph's timeline, you're looking at a 3-year window, which Jimmy Butler fits almost perfectly into. So this trade would be the definition of going all in on Steph. But it's just tough trading Kuminga for a 35-year-old player. Now, if this was Jimmy Butler 3 years ago when he was like 31, no hesitation trade. Final verdict: Kuminga, Wiggins, Looney, GP2, and draft compensation for Jimmy Butler. I probably wouldn't make this trade. I feel like that's a lot to give up. Now, if Jimmy Butler was to force his way to the Warriors, which I think is within his personality, we saw what he did when he was in Minnesota. He's very willing to make things uncomfortable to get what he wants. Now, while I do think his preference is ultimately staying with the Heat, if they're set on not giving him the max, he's gonna want out, and I think the Warriors is probably the best fit for him. They would need his cooperation to help orchestrate his way to the Warriors. If that's the case, the asking price goes down. Now, while I don't think the Warriors can get away with not giving up Kuminga, if the Heat were to lose leverage, the Warriors could probably get away with giving up less draft compensation. But this type of trade probably wouldn't happen until the trade deadline. So while I wouldn't do this trade, I can see the argument in favor of it. This gives the Warriors a necessary talent upgrade and gives Steph a legit second option. Someone who's a playoff riser, someone who's clutch, someone you can depend on if he can stay healthy. But I guess those two things go hand in hand. But you know what I mean. Finishing up on Kuminga, there was a recent report that the Warriors have no intentions of offering him a max contract, which would be worth $224 million. The same contract Franz Wagner got. Look, I'm gonna be honest. I wouldn't be comfortable giving Kuminga that much money either. While we can all agree Kerr has held him back to some extent, that being said, I think it's still a lot for Kuminga to improve on. At $224 million, that's an insane amount of money. Like, if Kuminga's getting that much, I better get 27 points a game every night, bro. Like, I need to see that every single night. And I just don't think he's that level of player yet. Now, can he get there? Does he have the upside to be that? I think he does, but he's not that right now, this season, in order to justify that contract. The deadline to get this extension done is October 21st, so I don't think they come to an agreement by then. I think the likeliest scenario, and the path that I would go down, is that this gets resolved in restricted free agency. I think the Warriors let it play out. If Kuminga balls out, he balls out. A team will offer him a max contract in the offseason, hoping the Warriors won't match it. The Warriors ultimately will match it, because they're not gonna let him walk for nothing. Because after all the trades that they declined put them into, you really think they're gonna let him walk for nothing? It's not happening, bro. No matter what contract he gets, they're gonna match it. Also, I think the Warriors learned a lesson with Jordan Poole. He's a young player that showed flashes, and they eagerly gave him a contract before they needed to. And that contract turned into one of the worst contracts in the league. They're not making that same mistake. While I'm not saying giving Kuminga that much money is a mistake, I think the best course of action is to let it play out into restricted free agency and let the market dictate how much he's worth. And then if the market says he's worth that, then all the Warriors gotta do is match it. But anyways, that's all I got for y'all. If I entertained you or you learned something new, do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button. I'll holler at you on the next one. Peace.